For joining us today. My name is Brooke Medina. I'm the Vice President of Communications here at the John Locke Foundation, and welcome to our online audience as well. We are very glad that you have joined us digitally, and please feel free as you're watching this presentation to post your questions and comments. We will be monitoring them, and there will be time for a Q&A at the end of this conversation, and so we will make sure to get to those if possible. So the topic today, I'm going to allow our speakers and our introducer, Dr. Terry Stoops, to lay the groundwork for, but as all of you all know, the topic today is related to learning loss, and that is definitely at the fore of many parents' minds. As a parent myself, it certainly is, but just voters in general and North Carolinians, this is something we all care about, and as is evidenced by you deciding to be here today, as well as tuning in online, so thank you for that. A few items that I just wanted to bring your attention to before we get started are not related to education in particular, but other work from the John Locke Foundation. And the first is that we just came out with a new study, a new research report. It's available on our website. It's called Big Blow: Offshore Wind Power's Devastating Costs and Impacts on North Carolina. As we know, energy costs are through the roof and they are skyrocketing. And we're looking for real solutions that can lower the cost of energy for North Carolinians. We know this is an issue especially that disproportionately impacts lower income families. We want to make sure that they have access to affordable energy that is reliable. And so we have produced this study. It is a critique of offshore wind. And so we hope you will take a copy on your way out. So if you need a copy of it, please feel free to stop by our front desk and we will get you one. And we also have our latest edition of Carolina Journal. And so this is our print edition, and it is available online on our website, but you can also grab a copy of the print issue on your way out as well. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Dr. Terry Stoops, but again, thank you all so much for being here. Terry?
Hi, I'm Terry Stoops, the Director of the Center for Effective Education. I'm going to introduce our speakers. I believe this is in the order that they'll be speaking. Superintendent of Public Instruction, Catherine Truitt, service in education, began as a high school English teacher where she spent 10 years as a teacher and 3 years as a turnaround coach. It's these classroom experiences that Truitt draws from when considering how best to equip students, engage parents, and invest in teachers. In 2015, Truitt was appointed as North Carolina Governor Pat McCrory's Senior Education Advisor, where she coordinated policy for all dimensions of public education and helped lead the development of strategic state education policy goals for ages 0 to 20. Most recently, Truitt served as Chancellor of nonprofit Western Governors University, North Carolina. As Chancellor, she focused on increasing access to higher education for 1.5 million North Carolinians with some college but no degree. Prior to joining WGU-NC, she served as Associate Vice President of University and P-12 Partnerships at UNC General Administration. Truitt has a Bachelor of Arts degree in English from University of Maryland and her Master's in Education from the University of Washington. She and her husband have been married for 27 years and have 3 wonderful children. Dr. Jenny Korn serves as the Director of Research and Evaluation at the Office of Learning, Recovery, and Acceleration. Previously, she served as Senior Advisor at My Future NC. My Future NC is a statewide nonprofit organization focused on educational achievement and is the result of cross-sector collaboration between North Carolina leaders in education, business, and government. Dr. Korn has extensive experience conducting research in school settings and providing technical assistance to schools, districts, and state-level education staff focused on research, evaluation, and policy in the Southeast, most extensively in North Carolina. We have wonderful speakers here, but I'm most privileged to mention that they're also very good friends. So I'm looking forward to their presentation. First up, our Superintendent of Public Instruction, Catherine Truitt.
Thank you so much, Dr. Stoops. Can you all hear me okay? Yes. Okay, great. I'm just going to grab the clicker. Well, it certainly is an honor to be with you all this morning or this afternoon. Thanks for taking time out of your lunch hour to come and hear a little bit about what's happening at the Department of Public Instruction, as well as specifically around this issue of learning loss and learning recovery that Brooke mentioned. I'm really excited to be here with my friend, Dr. Jenny Korn, who has been working in research and education for many years. I find that research and education and using data is critically important. It always has been, but it's especially important now because education is such an emotional hot button issue these days. And we need to use the data and the research to pull some of that emotion out to really get at the truth. So I'm excited that she's going to delve a little bit more deeply into some of the things that I talk about today with a focus on what we're doing about learning loss at the state level. So I came into office in January of 2021 when I declared my candidacy for state superintendent as a first-time candidate. There was no pandemic, there was no critical race theory. And so when I took office, schools were closed, and I knew that despite the horrors of the pandemic and what it's done to children, what the school closures have done to children, I knew that I needed to produce a strategic plan that not only recognized what the learning loss impact was sure to be, but also a plan that recognized that the challenges that we had prior to the pandemic would not only still be there, but would be exacerbated. And so I set as my North Star the idea that all children deserve a highly qualified, excellent teacher in every classroom. And the reason I did this is kind of obvious, right? Education should be about students, and so often education is about adults. But the truth is that we have a human capital challenge in our state in education. We do not have a funding challenge. We have given so much money to education over the past 20 years, over the past 40 years, and no matter how much money we've given or not given, the results have been stagnant. And so the issue is not that we underfund or overfund public schools. The issue is that we have places in our state where people don't want to live and teach. And how do we overcome those challenges and ensure that we have enough teachers, but that also we have high quality teachers? So once I named my North Star, I set about building a strategic plan. And I am a military spouse. My husband is getting ready to finish 30 years in the military, 15 active, 15 in the reserves. And so Operation Polaris became the name of my strategic plan. And for those of you who can't see this, the center of the plan says the Office of Learning Recovery. And I knew that given the fact that as state superintendent, I do not have regulatory authority over local boards of education and local superintendents, and because I knew that we were going to be getting billions of dollars from the federal government, 90% of which would go directly to districts for learning loss recovery, I knew that I needed to find a way to impact what districts were going to be doing. I wanted to help districts be good stewards of that money and to figure out how we at the department could best support our local public schools and charter schools, even though we can't tell them how to spend that money. And so I wanted to create this office, and I wanted it to be led by somebody who had been a teacher, but someone who also had experience that I did not have in academia as a researcher. And for that reason, I hired Dr. Michael Marr. He actually ran against me on the Democratic side for state superintendent. And if he were here today, he would chuckle and say, "Thank God I lost." And then he and I hired Dr. Korn to be the Director of Research and Evaluation for the Office of Learning Recovery. Now remember, we're talking about over $6 billion between the Trump administration and the Biden administration, in addition to the $2 billion that we normally get from the feds for public schools every year. So an additional $6.5 billion, 90% of which went to districts. What you'll also see here is 4 satellites: literacy, human capital, accountability and testing, and student support services. And I'm just going to give you an overview over these right now. So literacy. Prior to the pandemic, 67% of 8th graders in North Carolina were starting high school not reading proficiently. 67%. And that's average in the US. The reason for this is actually very simple. About 40 years ago, we stopped teaching phonics to elementary age school children in favor of something called whole language, and then something that morphed into balanced literacy. I could give a whole talk just about that. And as a result, we have generations of students all over this country who don't read proficiently, and they don't read well enough to be successful in post-secondary education. And at a time when the reading level that is required for, take the military, for example, the reading level that's required to be a contributing member of the military is so much higher than it used to be, yet the reading level of our high school graduates is lower than it used to be. And so the Excellence in Public Schools Act, which is Senator Berger's signature legislation, was revamped right as I was coming into office. We worked with Senators Lee and Ballard to rewrite the Excellence in Public Schools Act to recognize the research behind how the brain learns to read, which is called the science of reading. And that science of reading is very clear that a phonics-based approach to early literacy instruction is how the brain learns to read. We are hardwired to learn to speak. We are not hardwired to learn to read. And so this legislation passed in April of 2021. It had bicameral, bipartisan support, and the governor signed it immediately. It calls for all pre-K through 5th grade teachers to receive professional development in the science of reading through a professional development program called LETTERS, Language Essentials to Teachers of Reading and Spelling. And as of June, we had begun training over 25,000 teachers and elementary school administrators. The final cohort began in June and another in August, and we will have trained 35,000 teachers using $40 million of that federal money that has largely remained unspent in other states. So we're very proud of this work. We've developed a sustainability plan so that this work will continue. And I've already been in districts that were the early adopters of the science of reading. I've seen their teachers in action. I've looked at their data, and they are already seeing gains in their kindergarten through 3rd graders. It's really amazing. It's just, it's a combination of common sense and what brain research tells us. One of the platforms that I ran on was the need to reform our testing and accountability model. Right now in North Carolina, our model, which is our accountability model at the state level and at the federal level, that we are required to have by law, defines school quality in a very narrow way. It takes an algorithm of 80% achievement, in other words, how students did on end of grade and end of course tests, AKA high stakes testing. And then it looks at a model that determines how much a teacher grew a group of students over the course of a school year. And that counts as 20%. So the algorithm takes that 80% achievement, 20% growth, and spits out a letter grade. And a school gets a letter grade that you are a D school, or you are an F school, or you are an A school, et cetera. And it will not come as a surprise that income correlates to that letter grade. So not all high poverty schools are F schools, but all F schools are high poverty schools. So the problem with this is that we also have a very high school graduation rate. 96% of kids is it 80? 96% I think is Wake County. I think statewide it is about 89% or something like that. Yeah. That's a really high number. And yet, only 31% of those kids that graduate get any kind of credential of workplace value by the time they're 24 years old. And that includes getting a 4-year or a 2-year degree. So we're talking anything from a truck driving license to a 4-year degree. Only 31% get anything by the time they're 24 years old. This is a problem for our economy and for entitlement programs. This leads to more entitlement programs, first of all. But second of all, it prevents North Carolina from growing its economy. We've always been able to meet our workforce demand in North Carolina because we are a net importer of talent from other states. But we have to start educating the people who live in this state. So what does a high school diploma mean? What is the point of a high school diploma if you can't become a functioning member of society and the economy? So I looked to something called a statewide portrait of a graduate as my starting point to re-examine the testing and accountability model. Because obviously, if our accountability system does not provide an accurate or broad enough picture of what student success means. If we have a 92, whatever it is, % high school graduation rate, but you can't be successful in the post-secondary plans of your choice, what are we doing? Especially given that 43% of the state's budget goes just to K-12 education. So we reached out to a nonprofit. We have, we have paired these regions together. So, we have 8 education regions in the state, and we created design teams to come up with a statewide portrait of a graduate that would define what the working with communities of faith, business leaders, higher ed, just average people in the community, school leaders, of course, students and their parents, to help figure out what, aside from academics, what else do students need to be able to do when they graduate from high school. Because if you talk to any employer in our state, they will tell you, even before the pandemic, before the Great Resignation, I can't find high quality people. I can't find the people that I need. The kids who are coming to me are useless. So things like resilience, leadership, communication, these are words that have come up from all of these groups, saying that this is what we need for kids to be learning in high school. So eventually, this portrait of a graduate in its final form will be used to re-examine and remodel our school accountability system. I would like to see schools judged on not just that 80% achievement, 20% growth, but we need to be looking at things like chronic absenteeism, parent satisfaction surveys, after-school opportunities. Is the high school encouraging students to participate in College Career Promise, where they can take courses online at the community college for free and earn college credit? Are they offering computer science courses? Because in 10 years, 70% of jobs are going to require some knowledge of computer science. So there's lots of things that our schools should be measured on, but are not. So along these lines, I declared 2022 the year of the workforce, because we have got to stop telling kids that the only pathway to the middle class is through a 4-year residential college experience. We have to start helping our counselors and our parents understand that there are a lot of other kinds of opportunities for students to engage in, rather than thinking that all kids need to go to college. And so we have ensured that at the department where we approve career technical education courses, that we are aligning our offerings with workforce requirements. 50,000 jobs in IT in this state go unfilled every year. We've got to start making those opportunities available to all kids across the country, across the state. It also, I know this sounds like not much, but just asking teachers and administrators to reframe in their own minds what the purpose of school is huge. So often teachers get caught up in this. The purpose of 3rd grade is to get ready for 4th grade. The purpose of 7th grade is to get ready for 8th grade. No, the purpose of school is to prepare a student for the post-secondary plans of her choice. And if we're not creating kids who can be successful, then we're not doing our job. So our workforce goals that we created have to do with making sure that students have access to pathways when they're in high school. The access should be equitable. Just because you live in Gates County instead of in Chapel Hill doesn't mean that you shouldn't have access to an IT pathway, which is a harder lift for them because they don't have anyone there who can teach the courses. But surely we can think outside the box and maybe leverage technology to get that opportunity in front of kids in Gates County. We are in the process of creating a parent toolkit so that parents understand what's available to them. And so if this is something that you're interested in, we have a lot of information about this on our website. So that is an overview of Operation Polaris. We're also looking at, we're in the process right now of rewriting how we license and compensate teachers so that we can attract more millennials and Gen Z into the profession by creating a pathway to advancement, and that is more, makes teaching not a job that you have to stay in for 30 years in order to realize all the benefits, and that creates opportunities to be promoted without having to leave the classroom and go into administration, which was not something that ever appealed to me, which I left the classroom in order to continue advancing in the profession. So lots going on. It would also, by the way, not compensate teachers solely based on years of experience anymore, but would, rather than just input, would compensate them for outputs as well. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Korn, who's going to talk to you about what the Office of Learning Recovery is doing to help districts help their students.
Thank you, Superintendent. Can you guys hear me okay? Am I okay on audio-wise? Okay, great. And I'm going to start this just so we So good afternoon. My name is Jenny Korn. I am the new Director of Research and Evaluation over at the department. I have had the pleasure now twice presenting during the Shaftesbury Luncheon, once about digital learning when I was over at the Friday Institute, and then again with my future NC. So really appreciate the opportunity to be back in front of you today. So one of the things I think that I really am grateful to the superintendent and to Dr. Marr for is thinking about research and data at the very center of recovery. That in order to come up with a plan that was targeting these resources, they knew they had the vision to say, you know, we really need somebody inside the department who gets up every day and is trying to think about how can we leverage the data we already have access to, how can we think about collecting data in new ways to be able to give us some direction. There is an enormous amount of resources coming into the state right now, and but it's not all of the money. You know, I mean, it's an enormous amount, but we still need to be able to target the resources. And the way that you do that is through data. And so really wanting to be committed deeply to transparency, partnership, and coordination, that has really led the work that I've helped to kind of provide some initial planning for. Inside the agency, there hasn't really been anybody focused on this idea of research and evaluation to drive evidence. We've done a lot of things around compliance, federal accountability, federal reporting, state legislative mandates, but really taking some ownership inside DPI and being proactive about our research and evaluation priorities, and then using data to continue to drive those decisions that we're making. Let's see. So we've got a couple of big research studies that our office has had an opportunity to kind of lead. One is this very first bullet is what I'm going to be talking about today. There's there's a big report that's been submitted on it and released, so I'm going to jump to kind of the results. And if you guys have additional questions about the process or the data that was used, I'm happy to answer those. But in addition to a kind of this first quantitative, very data-heavy, numbers-heavy report, we've also been investing in some more qualitative research, also wanting to elevate the voice of parents, of administrators, of teachers, because the numbers can tell us what is happening, but you really do need some qualitative data to help you understand why. And so we've decided to kind of invest some of those state reserves, some of the state funds in qualitative research. We've also gone out and gotten external funding, recognizing that, you know, there are places outside of North Carolina, the federal government and foundations that fund a lot of this work. And so again, being very proactive and targeted about about proposals that we're writing to learn more about what's going on inside our state. So this first study I was going to talk about, Superintendent talked a little bit about some of the growth data that we have in our state. North Carolina is very unique. We're probably one of maybe 15 states that collects growth data statewide. We have a partnership with the EVOS team at SAS. And what that allowed us to do, having that existing partnership with the EVOS team as a part of our kind of longstanding accountability models, school report card, that kind of stuff, it allowed us to get access to our statewide data much more quickly than other states. What we were doing was leveraging this existing partnership to run analysis on the data that we had from every single student in the K-12 public school system and all of their standardized assessment data. In other states or other studies that you might have seen, it's samples. They're taking samples from different schools, different districts, different grades. This is a population study. It is every single standardized assessment score that every single student has. And then we partnered with SAS to run analysis on all of that data that showed us the difference between where a student was expected to be in the 2021 school year and where they actually were. And by doing that analysis and looking at those differences, what it does is it gives us a snapshot of the impact of the pandemic on the K-12 public school system. It is a very big question and required a very big data set to run that kind of analysis. And I'll say that our partners at SAS have said of all their state partners, we were the first to release the data. saying we did not hide behind any, we know, like we wanted a real picture of what was going on with our schools. The superintendent prioritized this, the state board prioritized this, to be able to say, now what do we do about it? We needed data to guide those instructions, and we released it publicly. Other states might have done some of that analysis, but they kept it in-house, inside their state department. So again, we all believe in this so much, the leadership level at the department, and I think this first report really demonstrates that. I can kind of skip ahead. One piece too for this group to know, in addition to that statewide analysis, and I'll run through the charts here in just a moment, we also wanted to make sure that our school level leaders had access to the exact same data about their local school district. So what we did is we asked the team at SAS to create parallel kind of reports to give to every single superintendent in the state, so that as we're kind of leading by example, right? If at the state level we have access to this robust data set, we wanted to make sure that all of our superintendents and charter school leaders were able to access that exact same data in the exact same way. And so that was kind of an amendment that we made to that initial contract. And again, the EVOS team was really supportive of that, of providing that additional information. So as we look at the results, what you're going to see is two graphs right next to one another. On the left, you'll see a picture, a snapshot from 2018. We're thinking of that as a business as usual school year, the 2017-18 school year. We wanted to go back a little bit. We wanted to have a picture of what a traditional, normal, non-pandemic school year looked like in the state of North Carolina. And then right next to that, you'll see a snapshot of 2021. So this provides us an estimate of the impact of the pandemic. And the way we set it up is you really want to think about it like a number line. So that line in the middle is 0, and that is a year of expected growth.
I'm just going to point while you talk.
Thank you, Superintendent.
Here's the 0.
Mm-hmm. And so think of that is 1 year of expected growth, because that is and it's a state average. And so what you'll see in 2018 is typically in a typical year, our students cluster around that 0, because what they're doing is taking all the data for every tested subject and estimating how much growth students will make in a single year. So anything to the right of that is above expected growth. Anything to the left is negative effect. And so you'll see in 2018, for whatever reason that year, students had a little bit additional, like they did better than expected for biology, for reading grade 8, but generally students were clustering statewide around that 0. And then when you look at 2021, this is a snapshot of the impact of the pandemic statewide. And so what you see here, the most negative impact on our students in North Carolina was math grade 8, math grade 6, math grade 5, and you also see that reading grade 4. And when you're thinking about the effect sizes, anything less than 0.02 is small. Anything greater between 0.02 and 0.06 is a medium effect, and anything bigger than that is enormous. I mean, because this is a population study. And so, again, as you're thinking about the so what, this is a conversation. So what, we know it was bad. So how does this help us? And I'll tell you, so based on this data, what our office was able to do, and in partnership with the superintendent, is decide that we needed to invest in middle grades math interventions. We had been committed, we are committed, we are on the path for early grades literacy. We had committed $36 million, $40 million in around the letters training, as the superintendent mentioned. And so in response to this data, we decided to prioritize for the next 2 years investments in middle grades math interventions, because that is where the need is. And then we asked our partners at EVOS too to break down this data into different groups of students. So I'll highlight just a couple of them before we take questions. So one was male and female. And this is interesting, and some of the reason we picked this out is because a lot of you might have heard, like in the middle of the pandemic, there was a lot of media reports and like early studies being released on samples. And they said, oh, the boys are having such a difficult time learning at home, learning on their own. They're so easily distracted. They can't learn on their own. And what our data population showed was that the girls actually struggled the most. There was a greater negative impact on female students in K-12 than males. And so one of the things we've done over the past couple of months is take this data to the field, do sessions like this, and also do them out with the superintendents and the chief academic officers. And we say, what do you think is causing this? Like, is this data resonate with what you saw on the ground? And one of the things we heard is that our girls learn best in social environments. They like to be able to work and talk with their peers, and being isolated at home really impacted their learning in the way that they normally learn, their ease of learn in collaborative projects or through communication strategies. And whereas the boys could work at home, get their stuff done, and then were out doing other stuff. They were doing video games and playing basketball with their buddies in the neighborhood. And so the so what of this that we've been talking to all the superintendents about and the chief academic officers is, so what are you doing to target math and science learning for your girls this year? Race and ethnicity, we wanted to see what were the differences. And here you can kind of see again that in 2018, kind of clustering around that 0, and then what you see in 2021 is differences between all races. The gaps widened for every single group. They all had negative impact, and the gaps widened. This one specifically is with economically disadvantaged students. So again, in 2018, this was one that was that I think was really tough for a lot of people to see. As a state, we had been making progress. That's what I see in 2018. We were closing gaps between economically disadvantaged and non-economically disadvantaged students. It's not perfect, but you see some difference across the board, clustered around that 0. And when you look at the impact of the pandemic, we really do see disproportionate impacts on students who are economically disadvantaged. And again, in some of our math and science in the highest. This was an interesting one. This is our AIG students, academically and intellectually gifted. This is a place too where what we were hearing was, oh, the AIG students are going to be fine. They can learn on their own. Don't worry about them. And what this was shocking when some of this stuff I was kind of checking with EVAS, like making sure they had people in the right categories, because this shows that our AIG students were more negatively impacted, that they were less likely to meet expected growth. And granted, when they get back, their growth kind of lines are steeper. They should but we don't know. This year is going to tell us a lot about what's going on, but this data, this baseline data, is critically important so that we can measure progress out of the pandemic. This is students with disabilities. This is another really surprising one. What the graph on the right shows is that students with disabilities were less negatively impacted than the general student population. And this was one where we certainly were like, did this hold up with what you guys were doing at the local level? And the answer was yes. They very intentionally, because of the state and federal requirements with meeting the needs of exceptional children, they brought them back first to in-person learning. They did very targeted outreach to these parents and communities to make sure they were getting the services that they need. So to me, what this chart shows is that the work that our school districts and our state did to serve this community during the pandemic worked. Similarly was our English learner population. Same thing, that the services that they provided during and throughout the pandemic. And so again, the so what becomes, what can we learn from that? How were we able to serve these high needs populations during the pandemic? And what can we do? What can we learn from that? And how can we continue to serve those those really important populations in the state. So next steps for 2022, we have got, this is a preliminary report. We're going to be doing additional analysis and releasing a final report in December. We're continuing to gather input for next level of analysis, continuing to work with SAS, hoping to continue the partnership into next year. So again, we can see kind of tracking that progress. And then a real commitment by the superintendent, by the cabinet, to being transparent, to using research to guide our decision making, and being focused on really strategic use of these resources. I think that's all. I think those are all of my slides. I don't know if we want to shift now.
Yeah, we can shift to
okay.
Q&A.
Great, and thank you guys so much.
Terry, do you want that first?
Thank you.
Over there, or do you get it just stand?
I'll just camp out over here. Let's see if we have slides. There we go. Perfect. All right, let's open it up to questions. We'll hit Wing right here.
Hi. I was just wondering, you guys consider the role of parental involvement as a variable in all this? I'm just thinking about like with disability, because I mean I have a child with disability, and we go extra steps to help a child, to learn. And I'm just wondering if that is a variable as well as with the economically disadvantaged, whether there's a correlation with parental involvement in the teaching, tutoring.
So I'll just say, I'll let Jenny address from a research standpoint the answer to that question. But common sense would tell us that there would be that there would be an impact. But my husband and I, neither one of us could stay at home during the pandemic. I left my then sixth grader and then my high schooler at home to do virtual learning through Wake County Public Schools on their own. One of them suffered emotionally, but not academically. The other one suffered academically, but not emotionally. And I think that we are a really good example of a non-economically disadvantaged family who could not be there at the house to help their kids. And so I don't know, do you want to address that from a research standpoint?
I mean, we don't have any strong way of measuring like parental involvement that we could add into the model. I will say that as we've gone out and I've talked to folks around the state, one of the things that we heard is that's the hypothesis about why math suffered more, is because parents felt really comfortable helping kids with early grades math, like with elementary arithmetic and that kind of stuff. But when it got to middle school and like algebra, that the parents were like, I'm out. Like that is not something I can help you with. And so that I think that's what we've heard as far as being reflective of parent involvement is there. So I think that's another reason for that piece. But I would love to be able to think about a systematic way to get at that question that you're asking about. It's almost like, what is the effect or what is the impact of parent involvement on students' academic learning?
Yeah, it's like a covariable.
Right.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, with the kids missing a lot of time, I think the question is more for elementary schools, kindergarten through 5th grade. How easy is it for a parent to say, I want my child to repeat that grade?
My understanding is that a parent cannot say, I want my child to repeat that grade unless their test scores and their grades bear it out.
In those kindergarten through 5th grade, the grading system is not usually the same. You can't usually tell that it's an A, B, C, or whatever. So I wonder how they would say no.
In Wake County, where they use standards-based grading in elementary school on a 1, 2, 3, 4 scale, while they don't translate to A through B, it's a series of competencies that they have to check off. And if they haven't mastered those, then they would hold back the child. But I don't think a parent can request, unless the teacher agrees that the student needs to stay back. I don't think a parent can just request that after kindergarten.
Lee Teague.
Got a question for each of the ladies. Dr. Korn, was there a difference between different educational models, traditional school, charters, homeschoolers, private schools?
So this data is only students in all public schools. When we pulled out charter schools and shared that with the Charter School Advisory Board, we did a analysis as far as was there significant difference between traditional public school and charter school, and there wasn't at the statewide level. I am sure that there are differences, school to school, district to district, but we've got that report for the charter school community. So again, to help guide decision making, for that group, but there was no significant difference between those two.
And Superintendent, have you looked at the virtual remote academy bill for the General Assembly? Do you have an opinion on it?
So I have looked at it, and it's not in its final state yet. And so I don't have a comment at this time.
All right, handsome gentleman up front.
Having been a county superintendent, I realize there's problems, but what about social issues? That really concerns me. I could predict pretty much the inner city schools had problems, schools in the rural areas had difficulty. My schools that achieved the greatest were suburban, where parents were interested. So with the decay of the inner city, the destruction of the family, homelessness, we could not attract people to go to the rural areas because there was nothing there for them. So how does all this impact with the data that you're showing?
So I think you're describing the human capital challenge that I mentioned early on, but you're also describing what we now think of as the social emotional learning needs of children. So we're seeing anecdotal evidence all over the state and the country right now of a need for student social emotional well-being to be considered in ways that maybe we didn't before. We're seeing more fights at schools. And when I talk to local superintendents, what they tell me is that they are seeing rates of bad behavior, for lack of a better phrase, on the rise. The teacher working conditions survey, which is given as per legislation every 2 years in our state, every superintendent gets data that's specific to the school level so that they can share it with their principals, and it asks teachers to talk about the extent to which bullying is a problem in their school, violent behavior is a problem, whether or not the principal is supporting teachers when there are suspensions. Principals are under a lot of pressure right now not to suspend students. On the one hand, that's a problem because it's disruptive to all the other students. But on the other hand, those out-of-school suspensions create a vicious circle. There has to be an alternative to those out-of-school suspensions. So I would say that we're collecting the data through this survey. It's given to I've said very publicly, the onus is on the local superintendent and the principals to share this data with their teachers and to do something about it, because it does have to do with teacher retention. If a teacher doesn't feel supported by their principal, they're not going to stay.
But in the inner city, when you have attendance at like 18 to influx of immigration. How do you deal with this problem? I mean, it's just almost insurmountable.
I think that there is, it is place by place. I think that the poverty that we see in the western part of the state and the eastern part of the state and the rural communities is different. We actually do not have, we know from the first year of the pandemic that teacher mobility and attrition is the same as it was before the pandemic. And I think that certainly our inner city schools actually have more resources. In North Carolina, we fund our highest poverty schools at a rate of 33% more than our lowest poverty schools. But I think that these challenges that you're describing are not new. I think they've been happening for the last 3 decades. And I would just say politically that our urban centers have tended to have one party in charge, and they've not seen any kind of improvement in the problems that are specific to our urban centers. So I don't know what the solution is. Yeah.
Renee.
Yes, we've got a question from one of our online viewers. So what mechanisms are in place to make sure districts responsibly spend their COVID emergency money? And is there any recourse when districts misuse that money?
So the easy answer is that there is a plan that districts have to submit to the department, and then we have to submit those plans to the feds. We do not have the ability to say, no, we can say, yeah, the feds are very clear that you cannot build a new athletic field. So no, you can't do that. Outside of those allowable uses, we are not able to say you can't spend your money on that. What we can do is, after the fact, say you said you were going to spend your money on this, but you actually spent it on this, and then they'll get audited by the feds. But we do not have any regulatory authority over the districts on, as Jenny said, what we're doing is saying, look, your data is really clear, Superintendent Jones, that Math 8, the vast majority of your students are struggling in Math 8. So we recommend that you spend your resources on Math 8, but we can't make them do that.
And I will say, too, that our CFO has been very committed to transparency. So she's got dashboards up. Her office has put up both what's been spent and what the plans are at the state level, but then also you can drill down and see at the local level how folks are planning to spend their money, what's been kind of drawn down. And then one more piece, we have a new, just last week announced a new partnership with the Nc Collaboratory, which is it's a center over at UNC Chapel Hill. And through that partnership, we're going to be doing some pretty rigorous research on a lot of the recovery work going on in K-12. And one of the pieces, because we got a lot of questions about return on investment and kind of cost benefit, how do we know that these costs, that what we're spending is going to have a positive impact on students? And one of the priorities for that research work is going to be funding cost benefit studies and return on investment analysis with some of the researchers across the state. So that RFP was just released, RFPs. It's $6 million in research funds that we as a department got to partner and set our priorities, which based on that feedback was, again, this commitment to wanting to make sure and understand how these dollars have been invested and is there an impact on student learning and academic outcomes for students.
The question, Jenna.
So the majority, or not, maybe not the majority, I don't have my data exactly right. A very large number of teachers in North Carolina schools come from our UNC system, schools of education. Do you know offhand how many of those schools are teaching the science of reading in the way that you want to see for our elementary students?
So back in 2017, when I was working for President Spellings at UNC General Administration, she got a grant for an outside group to come in and go to all of our UNC colleges of education and look to see which ones were doing the science of reading and which ones weren't. And this is back in 2017. Remember, she was President Bush's Secretary of Education. So this was something she knew a little bit about. What we found is that even in colleges of education that purport to be science of reading proponents, that you would have rogue professors who were not teaching the science of reading, and who were sticking with balanced literacy and whole language. That there was actually a report that was written by those consultants that was presented to the Board of Governors. So there is kind of on the record information about which universities were doing it right and which ones weren't. Now, part of the legislation with the new Excellence in Public Schools Act requires all of the UNC system undergraduate colleges of education to have a literacy fellow that is kind of in charge of doing this work with their colleagues. And it does require, the legislation does require that the colleges of education teach the science of reading. Now, whether or not they do is another matter, but I can tell you that when the test scores start to turn around, like they will, it's going to be very clear, because we track, there's an exam called the Foundations of Reading, which has just been changed to be realigned with the science of reading. And starting next year, that's the exam that teachers will have to take if they want to get licensed. And so it will be very clear which colleges are doing it and which ones aren't, because their teachers will not be able to pass that exam.
Yeah, we have time for one more question. Yes, sir, that has the shirt that I also own.
I don't know if this is a good one for the last question. I'll try. It's a question to follow up. With regard to all those great charts about the subject areas and grade levels, if you explained this and I missed it, I apologize. Were those the only data points collected, or were there for high school?
No, there were 23 charts in the full report. I just pulled out 7.
Okay. Well, in that case, then my follow-up does make sense. Why did you want to show us that English improved in 2021?
English 2,
Yeah,
there's that
English 2.
one anomaly. I know. Well, I've asked that question with the curriculum, the accountability folks, and what they say is that the courses, English 1 and English 2, are the same set of standards, just English 2 goes deeper and more is more complex. And so basically those, I guess they're juniors and seniors taking that English 2 would have just previously had that, basically the exact same standards the year before, and just done a next level of standards, complex standards, and then taking the assessment. So that's actually the anomaly. English 2 was the only one where you saw better than expected growth, and certainly something we're going to dig into going down the line.
Great. Let's give a round of applause to our speakers. All right. Thank you.